Hello and welcome to our very important lecture today discussing a very important disease known as Paget's disease of the bone. Paget's disease of the bone. So what is Paget's disease of the bone? This is a very important disease that is predominantly within the Caucasian population. It hits about 1% of Caucasian men who are above the age of 40 years old. And this is an inflammatory disease. It's an inflammatory disease that manifests as inflammation within the bone tissue, and it is divided into three phases as we see here. There's phase one, known as the osteolytic phase, and phase two is a mixed phase between osteoclast and osteoblast, and the last phase is known as the osteosclerotic phase. Some books divide Paget's disease of the bone into four rather than three phases, four phases. But actually, whether it is three phases or four phases, it is mainly always phase one is an osteolytic phase that is predominantly osteocytes degrading the bone, and the second phase is a mixed phase between osteoclast degrading the bone and osteoblast responding by trying to build up the bone that was degraded by the osteoclast and failing because they majorly deposit bone that is sclerotic bone and bone that is deformed bone. It is not a successful buildup of the bone tissue. But the last phase could be divided into two phases. There's an osteosclerotic phase and there is a malignant deposition of the bone. So we end up with bone that is deformed, and that is there's a deposition of deformed bone tissue. So we will talk more about that. So Paget's disease of the bone was named after the English surgeon who described it initially, that is Sir Paget. And what we need to know about the pathogenesis of Paget's disease of the bone is that we need to go back in our understanding. We mentioned in the past that this bone tissue, this bone tissue is comprised of three different types of cells. There are osteoclasts, and these osteoclasts degrade and resorb the bone, and they are activated, for example, in calcium homeostasis, when there is hypocalcemia, when there is a severe drop of calcium level in the blood. That would lead to the activation of the osteoclast, and the osteoclast will go to the bone. And we mentioned that one of the many functions of the bone is that the bone is a mountain of minerals, phosphate and calcium. So the osteoclast will start to degrade the bone to liberate this powder, to liberate this calcium powder, this calcium electrolyte from the bone into the blood, and that is how we bring up the calcium level in the blood. So osteoclasts are very useful, and we mentioned that osteoclasts can also be activated in menopausal osteoporosis. So women who have a drop in their essential hormone estrogen, what happens is there is a significant increase in the activity of osteoclasts, leading to deterioration of the bone. We mentioned also in the past that this deterioration of the bone, this activation of osteoclasts, is also can happen by senile osteoporosis. So men, although men do not undergo menopause, what happens is as men get older in age, and there is a drop in testosterone, so that is the essential male hormone compared to the essential female hormone, being estrogen. So what happens in senile osteoporosis when compared to the menopause menopausal osteoporosis. What happens is in senile osteoporosis, as men get older, what happens is with each successive round of replication, the telomeres get shorter. The telomeres get shorter and they get shorter, and that leads to an intercellular an intercellular protective response known as defected defected gene response, and that would lead to apoptosis and the death of the cells. So there are less genes, less cells that are able to initiate osteoblast activity. So we will end up with a drop, severe drop in osteoblast activity, leading to an imbalance where osteoclasts are now working more than osteoblasts, and that leads to senile osteoporosis and deterioration of of bone mass within the males. So what happens in Paget disease of the bone, we start with different different phases. We begin phase one is always the osteolytic phase, and what happens in the osteolytic phase, we see that this microscopic image here describes to us what's happening in phase one down here, and what we see is that these circular cells, these are the osteoclasts. So the osteoclasts are now beginning to degrade the bone, and that leads to inflammation. So clinically, Paget's disease of the bone is an inflammatory deformation of the bone. So the bone will get deformed in an inflammatory manner. But the causes can also be genetic, because we mentioned in the past that these rank RANK, these rank ligands, are secreted by the osteoblast, and they bind to surface membrane receptors within the osteoclast, leading the osteoclast to differentiate into an active form. So the osteoclasts are initially undifferentiated, inactive. But once the osteoblasts secrete the rank ligand, that rank ligand triggers the osteoclast to differentiate into an active form, and that leads them to stop working. So in the pathogenesis, what happens is sometimes there is a genetic mutation. This genetic mutation leads to an overt expression of the rank ligand, and the rank ligand stimulates the rank receptors on the surface of the osteoclast, leading to the osteoclast degrading the bone. We also mentioned that there is a very important association between inflammation of the bone and the secretion of cytokines. These cytokines are secreted from the stromal cells of the bone marrow, and the cytokines can also, during inflammation, the same way the rank receptor, when binding to the rank ligand, are activated and they degrade the bone, the inflammatory cytokines can also trigger the osteoclast to degrade the bone. So we begin with a phase of osteolytic phase where you have predominantly 100% active osteoclasts that are degrading the bone. Then when the bone is severely deformed and degraded, there is a response phase known as phase 2. And this phase is known as the mixed phase, so there is a mixture. What happens is now you will not only see osteoclasts working, you will see osteoblasts fighting back, these orange cells. The osteoblasts are trying to build up bone, but the osteoblasts are preventing them. So there is a tussle between the osteoclast and the osteoblast. And mind you that this osteoblast activity, in this osteoblast activity, we see there is a buildup of bone, but if you take a sample of this bone that is being built up in this mixed phase of Paget's disease, you will see that these cells are very weak bone cells. So this buildup is not a buildup of healthy bone. This is a buildup of very deformed and deteriorated bone. And then the last phase is when you have this abrupt morphological feature, and here you will see that there is a mixture of deformed and osteolytic, osteosclerotic bone morphology, where you see there is buildup in some places of the bone, and there is deterioration of other places, and there is inflammation, and there is redness and heat, and there is pain, and that is known as the osteosclerotic phase or the malignant phase. Paget's disease of the bone does not lead to cancer, but it causes malignant destruction and osteosclerotic bone morphology. So very simple understanding, and that is we have three phases in Paget's disease of the bone. The first phase is the osteolytic phase, destruction of the bone by osteoclast. Then there is a fight back phase known as phase two, where you have mixed activity, and you will see that in the phase one you will only see osteoclast. There is no buildup of the bone, but in the mixed phase you will see osteoclast with some bone structure. And in the last phase, you will not see osteoclast, but you will see this overt deposition of deformed bone, and there is an unfortunately a destroyed and deformed bone. There is no more osteoclast. So in phase one, no osteoblast, just osteoclast. In phase three, no osteoclast, just the product of osteoblast activity, and that would be this deformed bone tissue. So this is very important to appreciate, and this is a form of inflammatory cell, inflammatory bone disease. Okay, so this is the osteosclerotic phase. This is the osteosclerotic phase, and this is the osteolytic phase, and in the middle is the mixed phase, a mixed phase, and lastly you have the osteosclerotic phase. Thank you very much.